You're listening to Sonica on Wholehearted Men.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wholehearted Men Show with your host, Sonica. Every day in the news, we stand witness to examples of a world in which more and more men are showing up broken, misdirected, aggressive, violent, emotionally and mentally unstable. There's a visible lack of emotional intelligence evident in male culture that needs education and rehabilitation. We need to teach men how to love. On the Wholehearted Men Show, we explore how to help men live life with heart. The Wholehearted Men Show is sponsored by the Institute for Wholehearted Men, whose primary goal is to nurture the emotional and mental health of men so they can engage with the world wholeheartedly. Join us as we take this journey to change the hearts of men, one conversation at a time.
The Wholehearted Men Show. 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 The Wholehearted Men Show.
Our guest today here on the Wholehearted Men Show is Michael Chell. Michael Chell has been involved in emotional and spiritual growth work for more than 35 years. He's been involved with men's work through men's peer groups, co-counseling, sweat lodge, and drumming circles since the 1980s. Michael is co-founder of the Connecticut Men's Gathering, Comega, a biannual retreat for men where he has been a participant and workshop leader since its inception. He co-facilitates a weekly men's empowerment group. He has been actively involved in racial justice work for 5 years, co-facilitating a monthly men's racism dialogue group. Michael finds deep connection to the loving support of men exploring their own process and through his love of nature. Please join us in welcoming Michael Chell to the Wholehearted Men Show. Good afternoon and welcome to the Wholehearted Men Show with my dear friend Michael Chell, who we have some background together from Comega, right? The men's gathering up that I have told a lot of our viewers and listeners about. I think we actually did one of my recordings was from Comega, and I think I interviewed you then when we were talking about the background of Comega. But today we are being a little bit different because I think the current world environment and the energy that has gone out into the world, I think calls for a guest like you, Michael, especially on this show. I have been sitting back through the last few months, probably looking at the way we have ended up here in America and the way things are going, wondering whether we in this phase where we actually need this conversation about reconciliation. And I know that you've been doing a lot of work on race and reconciliation and, way before any of this was even something that became a thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's much needed now, but I wanted you to first start by sharing a little bit about what it is that you have been doing, what the dialogue is, what the conversation, why you even felt the need, to get into the work, and how long you've been at it so far before getting into this place where I try to engage you in what can we do as a society, as men, to try to start healing a lot of this language pain and energy and feelings that we have out in the world. So hopefully I haven't asked you too many questions, but
it's great. That's great. So one of the places I can start, back in the early 90s when we founded Comega, those of us that founded it, white, heteronormative, straight middle-class men. We did not think anything about gay men, bisexual men, trans men were anywhere in our consciousness at all. And about 3 years in, there was an incident that happened where a man was offering a topic workshop and wanted to exclude gay men for some reason. And a gay man stood up and said, basically, ouch, this doesn't work for me. Why are you doing that? And as a result of that, we started really looking at how we were being, in some ways, extremely homophobic and homoerotophobic. There was big issues. And so it was probably in the 90s that I started looking at some of this stuff. It wasn't specifically race back then. It was around sexuality, sexual orientation, and the distinctions between being straight or gay or bisexual. And we started doing that work, and I was really engaged in that work. So it's probably back then that I first started this stuff. Specifically around race and racism work, I'm driving home from a therapy appointment, and I've got NPR on the radio, and they're talking about this shooting that has just happened in a church in Charlottesville, where 9 parishioners have been killed. And I have, Sonic, there's 2 feelings that come up for me simultaneously as I'm driving. One is this kind of outrageous disgust, core in my body, deep outrageous disgust. And another one is this deep impotence. And the 2 are sitting side by side with each other. And what I notice that I do with the impotence is I want to move away from it. And I don't really want to feel the disgust either. And I know I'm in some trouble here because there's a way that I want to avoid the feelings. I don't want to be part of this. And it's also touched me in a place of coming from being a Jew. And my Jewish heritage has me be sensitized to the fact that for centuries, for millennium actually, people have been trying to get us. So I can relate in some way. So I made a phone call to a man I know who's part of the Connecticut Men's Gathering, man of color, and said, "Can I talk to you?" And he said, "Yeah." I talked to him on the phone for a little while. And it took us about 7 months to get together. We finally sat down together and we started talking about me being white, him being brown-skinned. And in the conversation, we ended up sharing about our children, our grandchildren, and crying together about the issues that we saw, and made a decision to do something about it vis-a-vis what happened in the Charlottesville shooting and what was going on for me anyway around feeling deeply outraged and deeply impotent. So we started a race and racism dialogue that's now in its 5th year for men, where we invite men in to do emotional process. And I think a piece of a question that I'm hearing you ask, whether you actually asked this or not, is why? What am I doing this for? You know, whom I want to save here. And I've been clear, and I've been clear on this in other groups that I've been part of. My primary reason for doing racial justice work is to save my own butt. I really need to do this work for me. Running around being outraged and not having an outlet for my outrage, and running around being deeply impotent and swallowing what that feels like and not doing anything with it is going to have me be reactive in the world, have me be more violent in the world, or me be numb and shut down. I don't want to live that way. So I'm here doing this kind of work because I want to save myself. And of course, doing the work for me also makes a difference in the world. But the focus primarily is on, what do I need to do to deal with my white privilege, to deal with my own internal issues so I can transform myself? And I just make up, it's a win for you, it's a win for everybody as I do the work that I do.
Right. Very good. I mean, you said reactive, violent, or shut down. And you actually said something else, which I think we need, I want to hear your interpretation of this, because it's come up even in a conversation that I was having with another Comega brother, where when you say white privilege, right? Explain what your version or your understanding of white privilege is, because I can guarantee you there is somebody white who is listening who either argue that, well, what does that mean, or they don't believe there is such a thing. So what is your understanding, Michael, of what you mean by white privilege?
So there's a book that I like, Power, Privilege, and Difference by Alan Johnson, wrote in 2017. And he's got a definition that I really like. And his definition the concept of privilege refers to any advantage that is unearned, exclusive, and socially conferred.
Mm.
And so I live from a place where I have not earned a lot of the privilege that I have. I have it just because I'm white. It's socially conferred. I walk into a bank, I get treated differently than if you walk into a bank. I walk into the local store, Walmart, some store to buy something. I don't get followed around the store. You do,
Mhm.
potentially.
Right.
The classic one is the traffic stop.
Yes.
I don't
I
need to
was just
put
doing
my
some
hand.
research on that yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. I don't need to put my hands at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. It's nice to do it. But if you get stopped and you don't do it, the chances of you dying as a result are way higher than the chances of me dying. So if I give the cop some lip, I'm probably going to be okay. Maybe I get a ticket. You give the cops some lip, maybe you're dead.
Mm.
Um, I don't have to tell my son the kind of things you're going to have to tell your son as a man of color when you
Right.
get stopped at a traffic stop. So that's what I mean by white privilege. I get a pass, I get a buy. And it's been historical in this country for decades,
Right. Right.
in lots of different ways. So that's what I mean by white privilege.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that definition. I think it's important. I was doing some research and they on traffic stops. There's a study that was done. I think they looked at 5 million traffic stops, and they put them in two buckets. Uh, the police say there's a safety and what they call investigatory, right? So there's
Okay.
safety and investigatory. So safety means we are stopping people because we're trying to keep the road safe. You've got a bust out tail, tail light
A
or
tail light
something.
that's on or something. Yep.
Exactly. They're trying to keep the road safe and people not to have accidents. And then there's the other investigatory, which is they stop you for something, but their ultimate goal is to
Something else.
investigate. Exactly. And
Right.
so they were doing this study, and I'll share in a link the study. And of course the numbers were disproportionate in terms of the fact that when they actually stop and they actually go ahead and search a car or find a reason to search a car, that it's going to be higher for black and brown people than it is going to be for white people. And it was multi-state, multi-jurisdictions. I think they did, over 500 or 600 different jurisdictions and all this kind of stuff, and looked at the data. So you make a very good point, because that is, I think a lot of times people, when we talk about what is white privilege, and then you talk about socially conferred, which I love that definition, it's like,
Yeah.
it's conferred on you that you and I, you gave an example, we walk into the bank. I would have to be dressed like this for somebody, probably with a jacket on, looking like, looking
Yep.
like, in order for somebody to even give me that, or this is a business person who's coming in. But if you and I kind of dressed the same way, we both wore like, sweatshirts with a hood on them, and we both
Right.
walk into the bank in jeans, you are going to be viewed completely different from me. And that's just, what's funny is how people find that so hard to understand. Some people find that so hard to understand, that that's what you're talking about, the social conference. And sometimes
Right.
it's not even conscious. It's not a conscious
Well,
thing. It's not like somebody's sitting there. Go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
that's right. Absolutely. I think most of us, this is what Robin DiAngelo talks about in some respects about white fragility. It's like when it gets brought to our consciousness, we go, that's not me. That's not me. It's so embedded in our culture. It's the water that we swim in. It's the air that we breathe. I don't know how it's even playing out, because
Mm,
when I get stopped by a cop, he treats me a certain way. I don't get to experience at the same time how you're being treated by a similar cop in a
right,
very different way for a same kind of stop.
right,
So it's like the cops aren't mean. They're not, they're nice to me. I
right,
don't get to experience firsthand what it's like to be in your body with your skin color until I witness it, or until I actually hear it, or I'm with you and I see that the cop's treating you differently.
right,
So it is the water we swim in.
right.
It's such a privilege, and I don't get it. And that's part of the problem.
Right, right, right. It's like the fish. A fish is not asking, "What's this water about?" You know what I mean? It's like, what I'm saying. A
Right.
fish is never going on. Hey, what's this water? Why is there water all around? It's like we're walking around, we're breathing, we don't think
Right.
about it. And I think you make a very good point. because even when you give a traffic stop example, you have to start with the feeling. When I'm stopped by a cop, I am already in a heightened sense of anxiety, regardless of
Right.
whether or not I know there is nothing wrong, especially if I'm thinking there's nothing wrong. You know, um, not too long ago, a few years ago, I think I had a busted taillight and I was coming off the off ramp, and, a trooper came behind me and pulled me over. And in my mind, of course, when I had left the house, I didn't know I had a busted taillight.
Right.
So of course I'm like, what the heck? You know what I mean? What the heck? What's this about? In my mind, because I have no clue that, yeah, I have, one of my lights is out, I'm going through 100 things, and I'm thinking like, but I know, I don't have, I don't have a warrant. There's nothing, I'm saying, I haven't done anything. I haven't robbed anybody. But you still have this heightened sense of, let me act right. When he comes over and he goes, can I have a license and registration? Like, I'm not even going to say, oh, what's up? You know what I mean?
Right.
He's asking for, like, I'm going to give my license and registration. Whereas the normal response would be, what's the problem, officer? You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And
And
if
that's
that's
the question I would ask if I was in a similar situation. It's like,
right,
I know I'm not speeding. What's going on here? I don't get it. And I'd ask the officer, like, I don't think I was speeding. Why'd you stop me? Or a cop
yeah,
usually would say to me, do you know why I stopped you? I said, no, I have no idea.
yeah.
You got a busted tail light. And my imagination is, now that I know better, it's like, you're probably sitting there with your hands at 10 and 2. Yes, sir.
Making sure I
Yes,
don't
sir.
reach for anything, right?
Right. I don't even think about whether I need to reach for anything. I do now because I've got my awareness
Right.
provoked. I have this I've been sensitized to it. I still think I'm actually going to be much safer than you, but at least I'm sensitized now, whereas before it's like I had no sensitivity to that.
Right. And I think that's where the value of the conversation. So what do you think happens when all these racial conflicts and discussions and things that we need to bring to light are not talked about or not openly and intentionally being discussed? What kind of an environment do you think that helps create?
Welcome to America. We've so
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That came from you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah. Um, so I mean, so Sonica, I don't know where you were on January 6th,
I
but
was
when
in
I
my
was,
house. Yeah, I was in my house.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
was watching what was going down at the Capitol, and so in some sort of microcosmic way, in an encapsulation, what happens is what happened at the Capitol. It wasn't just a group of people who are exercising their amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom to protest, freedom to voice their opinion. It was people who are acting violently, smashing doors and windows, some people that had zip ties, people dressed in military garb, someone that had a couple of pipe bombs, people
Right.
threatening, like hang people up, nooses. What we have is we have that behavior.
Hmm.
And I think that behavior comes out of deep-seated fear
Right.
and deep-seated trauma. So Resmaa Menakem in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, talks
I
about,
got that yesterday, by the way, by
oh,
your
good,
thing.
good,
Yeah,
by my
I was
recommendation.
reading that. Yeah, by your recommendation.
So he's talking about this, did white people have trauma, brown-skinned people have trauma, there's blue trauma referring to the police, but there'd be Asian trauma, Native American trauma. We've been traumatized for centuries, and we carry the trauma with us. And so without open dialogue, we end up being reactive to the trauma that gets triggered on an ongoing
Mm.
basis. We live from belief systems that, like, since you're brown skinned, you're going to be more dangerous than me walking into the department store to buy something. I'm going to buy something, you're going to steal something, because people have a generalized image of you that's different than their generalized image of me. The police seeing you in a car when they pull you over are going to react to you differently because of their stories and their beliefs about you. When we're walking on the street or on sidewalk and you're passing me and I'm coming towards you, I don't know who you are. if I go to my knee-jerk reaction, you're brown skin, you're more dangerous than if you're a pink skinned person.
Mm,
I'm going to cross the street maybe. You're a gangbanger versus there's someone who's my skin color is just another guy. And that kind of information has been taught to me,
right.
consciously or unconsciously as it soaks in, for decades.
Mm,
And so if we're not talking about this from a place of we're looking at that and deconstructing it, we're acting out of it. And as I'm acting out of it, then I'm being reactive towards you just by sight of you,
right. Right.
let alone what any behavior you might do that might be different than behaviors that I'm used to, because you've got some different subcultural milieu than I
Mm,
have. You're wearing a sweatshirt with a hood and you bring the hoodie up, and
right.
I don't wear a sweatshirt with a hood, but maybe I do. But if I don't, there's something about you, because that means you're a gang member
Right.
from what I've been taught over and over again.
Yeah.
So if we're not talking about it, then we keep acting as if the stories we make up are real, and then being reactive and defensive, and you get things like January 6th happening.
So let me play a little bit of advocate, like devil's advocate, with that January 6th thing. So
Yeah.
knowing that there's some people I know who actually attended, right? Who
Right.
actually attended, who are close to me, very close people that I love,
Hmm.
who actually attended. Whose argument on that is that just like
When you
any
say when you say attended the rally or
attended
attended
the
like
rally,
breaking in?
not the
Okay.
breaking in, but attended the
Okay.
rally, and the
I'm
argument.
talking specifically about the breaking in right now, but okay, I'm
Breaking the
with you.
rally, right? So you're
Yeah.
you're separating, because yes, in all groups we have people who kind of believe something and they say we're gonna show our support for something, versus this element within that group that says, okay, we're going to show our support, but we're also going to exhibit our behavior, right?
Right. Yep.
So the argument has been, well, those people don't define everybody's argument, right? Which is the same thing. And are we treating those people the same way that we say other people prejudice against people? Like there are some guys who wear hoodies and rob people, a few guys of color that do that. So does
Right.
that mean that I can't wear a hoodie in my neighborhood because of that guy? Does that mean that
Yep.
I can't walk into my suburb? I live in the suburbs of Baltimore, right? I can't
Hmm.
walk in, but I still can't walk into the bank in a hoodie because it says at the door, no hoodies. You know what I mean? No hoodies and
Yep.
no blah, blah, blah at the bank, because some
Right.
guy robbed a bank in Baltimore. So I am now affected by that. So that
Right.
would be the argument that people are making, even with January the 6th, that, you can't associate me with that behavior, even though it's the prevailing thought. What's your thought on that?
Well, if you can remember other rallies and marches in Washington, Black Lives Matter rally, if you know what kind of response there was, knowing in advance that the rally was happening, and people knew well in advance that this rally was happening, there would be 50 or 60 school buses lined up to take people to jail in case they needed to. There would be a lot more police presence. There would be National Guard presence. There'd be tear gas, there'd be rubber bullets, there might be other devices to try to stop people. If it was a bunch of black people doing on January 6th, or a bunch of Muslims doing on January 6th, what the white people were doing on January 6th, my belief is, based on history that I've seen recently, is that there'd be a lot of people dead and a lot of
Mm,
people arrested, but there would be enormous amount more police presence, National Guard presence, the
right.
kind of things we've seen in other cities. So I don't agree with you. I mean, it's like, from that perspective, I think that this is part of white privilege, that
Mm,
that the response in Washington, D.C. would have been really different on January 6th if it was a whole bunch of black people having a rally and then marching down to the Capitol, or a whole bunch of Muslim people or Native
right.
American people
Right.
versus white people. And so that's part of the white privilege. And
Mm,
I it's it's not even insidious. It's if you compare it to other protests, people
right.
protesting in the streets when George Floyd is being murdered, after his murder, and the police violence for people just peacefully protesting. So this wasn't a peaceful protest once they left the rally and marched down to the Capitol. And yet there's police posing, doing with selfies with people inside the Capitol. They've broken into the Capitol. It's like, I don't think people are going to be posing, doing selfies with a bunch of African Americans, Black Lives Matter people, or Muslims doing the similar kind of thing. It's just crazy making for me. So
I got you.
yeah.
I got you. And I had to throw that in because, you know, I know that there are many arguments and many conversations going on about January 6th. And I think the predominant one is, like you said, that many of us know that the reaction, because we've seen it, would be different.
Right.
We've actually witnessed how the reaction, and we've witnessed how the narrative was that, you know, the ultimate good of a Black Lives Matter march, okay, which is a reaction to something that is just tragic, police killing people instead of arresting them. If you're going to arrest somebody, try and arrest them without killing them. That's actually what the whole argument is. You know what I'm saying? Can you arrest this person without killing them? You know,
or use a taser on someone instead of shooting him in the back 7 times. If you need to take them down because you need support, taser him. That'll take him down. You restrain him. He lives. There's no problem, or there's a much less of a problem.
Right.
I want to go back, Sonika, to your example of the bank. You can't walk into the bank with a hoodie because someone had walked in and there was a problem. I make up this story that if I walked into your bank that you can't walk into with a hoodie, and I had a hoodie on, I might get stopped. But the chances of me being stopped or stopped in the same way as you being stopped are going to be really different. Someone says you can't wear a hoodie, I just pull the hood down. Oh, I'm a white guy with curly hair.
Right.
It's going to be fine. You pull the hood down, I'm not so sure that you're fine. Right. It's like our culture sees you as dangerous. The culture doesn't see me as dangerous. It might see me as dangerous if I prove to be dangerous. You're seen as dangerous until proven otherwise. That's part of the white privilege that our culture has. And so I would say I could probably get away with wearing a hoodie into your bank. Maybe not. But I've got a better chance than you do.
Right.
Because of my skin color.
Excellent. So let's yank it into this experience, these 5 years that you've been doing this conversation, right, on race.
Sure.
And I've been fortunate that coming into part of last year, I got connected with that, and I've been actually on some of those calls, and I think that they're phenomenal because it's really enlightening to hear some of the raw honesty and some of the most base questions, because we all come at this like we're here to learn and we're here to listen. And some of this stuff is going to be, like you like to say, some of the stuff is going to be ouch stuff. Right. You know, it's going to be ouch stuff. Even some of the questions may be an ouch question, but at least because I am amongst men that want to learn and that are open to learning, I can speak honestly and openly. Yeah. And it sometimes comes off as painful, or it sometimes comes off as aggressive, but it lands softly, because you're not dealing with people who are defensive, or they may be, but they've been willing to pull down those defenses to take the punches, to say, I'm willing to take these punches so that I can learn. You know? Right.
So and we create a container to support that. And I think that's an important piece.
Yes, yes. So having said that, what are the things that you have probably learned during this experience and some of the conversations that have made you really have those aha moments? Give me like 2 real deep, like aha moments that you had personally. And I know there are many, but give me give me like 2 real deep aha moments, because I think it's really great for, number one, people to understand that there are places like this where white people, black people, brown people, you know, Native American people just who are interested in learning how to connect and communicate with each other have opportunities to do that. And this is a forum where we can talk about that.
Sure. So one of them is an observation that happened when we were in the dialogue. Man of color is talking about going into a restaurant and being treated really poorly. Didn't get seated right away, is waiting. White couple comes in, they get seated, still waiting. Another white couple comes in, they get seated, and he speaks up and gets some flack. So, and so he's angry about it and wants to talk to the owner, the manager. There's a white man in the circle in the room who basically, when he gets a turn in the chair, says, like, well, just leave the restaurant, go to another restaurant, go somewhere else.
Wow.
And the man of color says, it doesn't work like that for me. It works like that for you because you're white. For me, I have to deal with that everywhere I go. And I could see that the white guy didn't get it. He was coming from the place of like, well, the restaurant's treating you horribly. If they treated me like that, I'd just go to a different restaurant and never go back there again. Man of color is saying, I deal with that wherever I go because that's the culture that's the difference. So they're going back and forth, and the white guy doesn't get it. Several months later, there's another same man of color speaking about another incident, something else going down. And the white guy is sitting there, and this is the guy who's saying, just go somewhere else. And he's talking about some other piece, and that has to do with work. And it's not like you just get another job. And this white man has one of those moments where it's like, this thing shifts for him. He starts seeing something from maybe 15 or 20 degrees different perspective. And I watch him get it, that what's happening is the man of color, that brown-skinned people don't have the same experiences and have the same opportunities as white-skinned people. My partner.
Don't worry about it. She's good.
She's great. So white-skinned people get to go to a different restaurant. Brown-skinned people could do that, but that doesn't mean that they don't have to deal with the same stuff. Watching this man get it, and then watching these two guys who are living from an adversarial kind of antagonistic place several months before actually physically hug each other. There's two things that happen in that moment for me. One is that there's a white male now who suddenly has a shift. He suddenly can see the water that he's swimming in to some degree, and he can suddenly breathe the air from a different perspective that he normally breathes, that he's not paying, not taken for granted anymore. That's one shift that happens. The other shift that happens is there's a man of color who finally has a white guy get it, who isn't beating his head against the wall saying, you people don't understand it. Like he's finally getting a connection in some way through the pain that he deals with on an ongoing basis.
Right.
When those things happen for both those men, for me, this whole grounding that happens because both people are shifting in some way. One man's being heard where he's not being heard. Another man is hearing something where he couldn't hear it before. So that's one example. And it was palpable in the room. Everyone in the room kind of dropped and got it. So the other example, I've been doing the work for a while, and I'm out with my partner. We just walked out of the room, and we're paddling on a pond, and we're getting done paddling, and we're paddling towards shore. And there's a guy in a power boat, a fishing boat, who is apparently trying to get out. And as we're approaching, he's yelling at some guy on the shore. And the guy on the shore is gesticulating in some way, but not saying anything. I don't get it because I'm far enough away. I can't see who the guy is on shore. He's pink skin. He has my skin tone. Turns out he's Asian as I get closer, and it seems to be he really doesn't speak much English. This guy is from the powerboat is screaming at this guy because he's mad because the guy's either unloading or offloading his kayak from his car, and the guy in the powerboat thinks that the boat ramp is only for people with powerboats. And he's yelling at this guy, and this guy doesn't understand what's going on. And he doesn't see me because I'm behind him in my canoe. And I'm getting closer and closer, and I can feel the energy coming off this guy, and he's screaming at this guy. So I interrupt him. I say, excuse me, hey. And he turns, he sees me finally. And I'm able to say to him, if it was me, I'm paraphrasing here, if it was me that you were talking to, instead of that guy, I would really have a hard time hearing you. And I'm making up a story that his first language isn't English. And I
Right.
imagine you're trying to communicate something with him,
Mm.
but he's not getting it. And if you were saying that to me, I'd be really hurt and scared. Now he's now looking at a white guy who's just like him. His whole energy just dropped, just shifted from being
Right.
antagonistic to being a little contrite, embarrassed. And then he looks at me and says, "Oh, I didn't think about that." Like he just shifted a little bit.
Mm.
Now, consequently, the guy on the shore thinks he has an ally with me and starts screaming.
He starts screaming back because now he's like, I've got a point.
He's screaming at the guy in the boat, and I put my hands up saying, "Stop, stop!" I mean, he's screaming part English and part whatever language he's speaking, but
Right.
stop because you don't want to escalate this again.
Exactly.
He
Exactly.
stops, but for me, interrupting the white guy who thinks he's got some legitimate say, and
Right.
of course, the guy who's on the shore who doesn't understand him isn't responding. So the white guy is escalating his
Right.
voice, which we typically do when you don't understand me. I say it louder, and you still don't
Right.
understand me. I say it even louder, and I start screaming,
Right. Right.
thinking that if my volume is loud enough, you'll get it. And
Right.
it's not about volume. When he got it, he shifted. The whole incident just settled down. So those are two examples. And the second one probably wouldn't happen if I hadn't sat circle enough with both men of color and white guys having the conversations that we would engage with each other in a way that we were actually actively listening
Mm.
and actively engaging rather than being in an adversarial defended place. And so it worked. It worked really well. Several years before doing the race work that I'm doing, that wouldn't have gone so well for me.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have gone so well for the other two guys. So
Right.
those are two examples.
Those are great examples. Thank you so much. Those are great examples. And I think you make a really good point about, how being in the conversations has helped. Because even for me, as you know, when we've had some of those conversations, I've been very fortunate to kind of begin to understand just how blind, like you said, your example of the water is just, understand the waters you're swimming in, because
Right, right,
if I am born in the water, I'm never thinking about water.
right,
I'm never consciously going, oh, geez, this is water. And oh, geez, I get to breathe in the water. You're not going to think about it. And on the other end, or on the receiving end of racism, or on the receiving end of prejudice, coming from the pain, it
hmm
takes kind of these dialogues that you guys have been facilitating to help one kind of start to work and look at the other side of it, which is, oh, I'm dealing with somebody who may not even see it. You know
right,
what I'm saying? May not
right,
even see it, doesn't even connect. And that
right.
aha moment that you're talking about, that aha moment that happened with the restaurant conversation, with the job conversation, that aha
Yeah,
moments are the moments that people have when they actually have the ability to engage,
right,
right?
right.
Because um, one of the things I think that I want you to also talk about is the folly of tokenism, right? The folly of tokenism, because I think what happens also in these environments is that you have people who want to kind of engage and act like they are trying to understand when it's really tokenism, right? It's really so
Right. So one of the things that we do, my co-facilitator and I, is when we do ground rules, so we have norms. We really want to support people in being authentic. And we support people in being authentic, we might be messy. The example that I use, and we talk about ouches. When I first talked to my co-facilitator, who's brown skinned, I remember saying something to him about being white knuckled, and I did this, like on the steering wheel, white knuckled. And he does this, and he says, "Look at my hands, look at my knuckles. I don't get white knuckled." And it's like, oh, it's an idiomatic phrase that I've learned, but it doesn't necessarily apply. It's a really minor piece between us, but it was one of the examples we use. It's like, I might say something or behave in such a way, I'm trying to look good. And
right,
it's like, let's get messy here. We'll hold the container. and we can clean the mess up. We much rather have people be authentic. And it's through authentic sharing using I statements and reflective listening and some of the things that we do and supporting men in being in truth with each other that really supports men in dropping. I think one of the problems that we have, and
Before you go, explain what dropping is, because
dropping.
you and I
So,
know it. Yeah. So let's talk
right,
about
that's a good
dropping.
point.
Right.
So, my experience of most of us men in our culture is we live from here up. We're divorced from this part of our body. I grew up in an era where, you know, you're supposed to give yourself up to the war effort. If it's a war, you give your body up. You work to support the family, even if it hurts. Big boys don't cry, suck it up kind of things. And so there's a way that I was taught not to experience my body very much. I think men of color, particularly, brown-skinned men, are taught in our culture that you're like superhuman. It's like, and black men don't feel as much pain or can tolerate more pain than white men, and brown-skinned women can tolerate more pain, and that's even doctors and professionals, believe that.
Residual culturalism from slavery, literally.
Right,
You know
right, and it gets carried forward, and so here we are, a group of men having a dialogue, and we're living from here up because of our culture, regardless of our skin color, but just being male. And it's not okay to be vulnerable. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and the way home to love and to the heart is through being vulnerable. When I was growing up as a kid, you don't be vulnerable. Hell no. You don't let people see you. You keep your cards really close to your chest, and you don't let your guard down ever. Because if you do, you're going to be gotten. So one of the things we try to do is we want to interrupt that whole patterning and support men in risking. And so we try to create a container where people can risk, because that's the way that we're going to not do tokenism. We're going to actually get honest. So one of the things that we want to support people in doing is risking feeling the shame that they feel, the humiliation in not knowing, or the realization, I've been stepping on people's toes. I've been acting like a racist for decades. And I want to be clear here. When I talk about being racist, because I'm white, I'm a racist, I'm not using the classical definition of racism, of being a racist. The classical definition has me conjure up someone who's like a KKK person.
Right.
An individual who has hate and malice in their heart, who wants to do physical, emotional, or psychological damage and harm to you, and who's going to want to act out on it. That's a classical definition. My definition is the definition that I'm walking around because of my culture, not knowing the water I swim in. And so I live in such ways that I don't know that I have the privilege that I have, and I act out of that privilege. And that's still being racist. I'm either going to be a racist or an anti-racist. I'm either deconstructing it or passively I'm going along with it. I don't need to be actively hating you or wanting to hurt you to fall into the racist category. And it's a distinction that my partner and I, in doing the race dialogues, keep trying to support men in getting, because what we want to do is support men in like not shaming themselves or having to defend against that I'm not doing anything bad and wrong here. I'm trying to do the best I can.
Right.
But being unconscious isn't good enough. Waking up and being woke to some degree is much better. So addressing the shame becomes really important, particularly when I accidentally step on your toes by saying something nuts about you. It's like, I mean, it's like, do you get sunburned? Does the sun bother you? It's like, do you need sunblock? I might say, and it could be a genuine question, but I get scared to even ask genuine questions because it's like, like, do you part your hair? Do you need, like, what do you do with your hair? What do you do with your hair? Little things, because I don't know what I don't know. And so we want to support men in risking, stepping beyond that, like, tokenism place and like, let's get real here, because that's where real change is going to happen.
Yes. And you use some great examples because I was talking to somebody and I used the example of, how kids are inquisitive, black kids are inquisitive about white hair,
Yep.
and white kids are inquisitive about black hair. And I told them, I said, it's not just black kids or white kids. I said, adults, because
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
adults who've gone through their lives never having
Yeah.
touched black hair. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And we've gotten to a place in life where if you came to me and said, can I touch your hair? You know what I mean? I'd probably be like, what the heck? You know what I'm saying? It's like we are at a place where it is literally, especially for black folk, it's like it's like one of the more racist things that, you know what I'm saying? It's like on the tier of like racist things
Right.
you can do. It's like on there, like he came and he wanted to touch my hair. Can you believe that? When,
Right.
and yet when you dialogue, when I got into these dialogues, and you actually understand that we are like that. You can go through life never being inquisitive about something like that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And never having had the opportunity. And
I'll
yet,
give you I'll
go
give you
ahead.
an example here for me. So I've looked into people's eyes. I've looked into people's eyes that have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes. The first time I sat down with someone who's Indian from India, and I'm looking into their eyes, and we're sitting very close to each other, topic workshop. I've never looked into the eyes of someone from that culture. I've never looked into the eyes of someone who has enough pigmentation difference, and it's like really looked like I'm really looking, and it's like, wow, this isn't the typical brown, blue, or green eyes that I'm used to for like, decades of my life. Can I really look? And when we give ourselves permission to look, we get to see the surface differences we all have slight differences. This is diversity. But we also get to connect with our similarities, but it isn't until we give ourselves and each other permission to really connect.
Right.
And of course, until that happens, if I don't sit with people that are different than me in some ways, I never get to experience what it's like to look into someone's eyes that is different. And it's like what ends up happening through the diversity, instead of seeing so much difference, we actually end up living into the commonality that we have
Yes.
with each other. And we
Yes.
have so much more in common. So
Yes.
what, you have curly hair and my hair, well, my hair's curly too. So it's like, you know, um, but we get to see how much we have in common rather than the difference that divides us. It's the diversity that actually binds us or blends us together. And
Yes.
we need to have the permission to really have a conversation to get
Right.
there.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I always plug Comega, wherever I go, because it's been life changing for me. And I think that
Uh-huh.
everything that you've talked about, the opportunities to experience it as, even as you were sitting here talking about looking in somebody's eyes, I can guarantee you there are people that I know who are on watching the show who are like, people look into, I'm like looking, yeah, men do look into each other's eyes to look
Right.
and have a conversation and truly see each other. And that's what Comega provided for me, because that's
Right.
not an experience I would have ever had in the enculturation that I've had in my life, right? The
Right.
opportunity to actually be seen
Hmm.
and to see
Right.
beyond just he's over there, blah, 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 what do you do for a living? But who are you as a human being? Not even
Right.
like a black man. Who are you as a human being first? You
Right.
know, because that's what's inside and what's
Right.
shining through the
Right.
exterior of you, you know.
Right. And the more that we have, you and I, people like us have that kind of experience, the less that I see your color as some way of creating separation and distance.
Right.
It just happens to be, it's like, oh, brown skin, glasses, curly hair, bow tie. I'm not wearing a bow tie. I mean, it's like, it's just a little piece of diversity rather than like, oh, there's danger here.
Right, right, right.
Right.
And I think it's about, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about what's the role that people like you who have been in this not even knee deep. I think you're like neck deep in this stuff. Sometimes you actually get over your head, I know, in this stuff. Um, what what do you see your role as being going forward? Because we're in a mess. Energistically, I think just the world has been in a mess because the energy that's been out the world. COVID didn't help us because what COVID did is kind of like put us in situations where we could stew. People who didn't have good stuff to stew on had the
Right.
time to stew on it now,
Right.
and
Right.
when you don't have the normal distractions, the life distractions, that I could do this, I could do that, I could do this to distract myself, it's kind of boiled over. So I know you were taking a deep breath to go, so I'm going to let you go. Go ahead.
Okay. So, well, when you ask me what my role is, I think there's a couple of things that really need to happen simultaneously. So there needs to be significant changes in policies. So I think when I think about things like the 13th Amendment, I think we need to look at how we treat people that have been incarcerated, and the whole judicial system needs to be looked at. And people that are felons basically are so downtrodden. They get out of prison, they can't get a job, they can't vote, they can't do a lot of things. I think we need to revisit policies. That's one of them, as an example. So, and that needs our whole cultural system needs to be looked at, and how we treat people. And that's just one example. Where I'm focused on is in individual work and healing on a one-on-one basis or small group basis, where the traumas that we've received as human beings, as white-bodied people, as brown-skinned bodied people, as blue-skinned or blue-bodied people, the police, as Menachem would say, needs to be addressed. And the way that I see that gets addressed is doing the kind of things that you and I have talked about and you and I experienced at Comega, where we actually where men actually sit together and have dialogues about how they perceive each other, how they see each other, and their similarities and differences. And we get to see our humanness, and we get to deal with our preconceived notions, most of which we don't even know are going on. We start bringing to consciousness what lives in us unconsciously. And we do the work that we need to do to really listen to each other on a one-on-one basis. And that's where shifts start to happen. And as I start to make those shifts, then I have much more space to start supporting people and supporting things going on and like addressing policy changes. But from my perspective, where the real work needs to happen individually. I need to deal with my trauma, my judgments, my opinions, my evaluations. You need to deal with your trauma and how that lands for you. And if we can do that together, then we can start changing and shifting.
Right. I think we were talking about truth and reconciliation, right? Because my whole conversation now is about what I call race and reconciliation, even though, it's a microcosm of the larger problems that we have. But I think that we started to talk about that in terms of, if we don't reconcile that part, right? And I think we also had started to talk about, even the conversation about reparations, like what does that even look? Why would you even be entertaining that? And I think we both landed at, it's because you have to start from some place which shows that there's been a sign of contrition, right? So why don't you talk about what your mindset is with that? Why is that necessary? Why do you think that dialogue even needs to happen? And I know we talked about it, but I think it'd be great for our listeners to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, I mean, part of what comes up for me, I'm smiling because I've heard people recently say that they don't think reparations would work. And of course, I'm wondering, it's like, what do you mean by reparations? And often when I have those dialogues, the idea of reparations is giving some sort of monetary or monetarily equivalent to people that have been harmed. So coming up with the trillions of dollars to give to African descent people whose ancestors have been abused and who've still been abused, right into the 21st century and continue to be abused, isn't going to be enough. It's not going to work, even if we had the money to do it. I mean, it may have worked in 1865 if we had actually followed through after the Civil War and given everyone who is now free 40 acres of land, and they actually got the land, got to keep the land. Then it would create some sort of level playing field for people to be able to farm and live their lives and prosper. The problem I see is that, first of all, I don't think we could actually even give enough money to make enough of a difference. And if we could, I don't believe that would work because it doesn't address the underlying trauma that most of us live. And so the way that I believe that reparations would happen, which gets connected to reconciliation, because I'm connecting the two together, is there's steps here. The first step is there needs to be an acknowledgement that there's a problem. I think there's a lot of people in the United States that don't even believe that we have an issue, whoever the we is. I can remember when Barack Obama was elected president, and the news media outlets are saying, well, we're post-racial now.
Right.
And it's like, because we have a black president, everything's okay. And it's like, that's crazy making. That's not true. It's not true. We weren't post-racial as soon as Barack Obama became president. I mean, we hadn't done much to deal with it. We just happened to have a black president. So admitting that there's a problem is a first step. There's a major problem in this country where there's huge disparities and there's a significant amount of prejudice and racism, and that white privilege is rampant. Owning that would be a first step. Speaking it out loud would be as partial to the next step, and being willing to be apologetic or make some sort of reparations, like being just willing to address it. I recognize it, I'm willing to address it. So an apology would be a great thing.
Right.
But apology isn't enough. I need not only to say, Sonic, I'm sorry that I stepped on your toe, your foot. I'm sorry that I was acting racially against you in some way. I need to make a commitment to changing my behavior, because I can apologize to you all day long while I have my knee on your neck.
Right.
It's not doing anything. I'm sorry that I'm abusing you, you poor black man, but I'm going to keep abusing you. I need to make a commitment to stop the behavior that causes the problem. And then part of what needs to happen is I need to talk about how I feel about that, how it affects me. The fact that I've engaged in the behavior, the fact that I want to stop it, all the fears, all the stuff that comes up inside me as I start letting go of this privilege or using this privilege to shift. And I think there needs to be an opportunity then for you, for people who have been abused, to respond, to say something. So there needs to be some sort of dialogue. It's like, as a white guy, I'm sorry I behaved this way. Well, as a brown guy, it sucked for the last 50 or 60 years of my life. Let me tell you how it's actually felt. And if we're dialoguing back and forth, this shift that starts to happen because the trauma starts to get heard and ameliorated. It starts to get addressed.
Right.
And then from there, making some sort of restitution to level the playing field, whatever that might look like. So the 13th Amendment, and addressing prison systems and the judicial system might be one way. But, we have unfair housing in this country. The issues around medicine and healthcare and the difference between living in urban areas, the access to food, the access to clothing and shelter in certain areas of the country versus other areas, all need to be addressed to level the playing field. There's a whole bunch of things that would need to be addressed.
Right.
But so that would come after, like, I need to own that I'm creating a problem here. I need to be willing to commit to stop the continuation of creating that problem, not just apologize, but make amends, and then be willing to have a dialogue with you and be willing to listen to you and reflect back. I hear what I've done in the last 4 centuries has hurt you and damaged you.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
So that for me would be a piece of reconciliation. And the reparations piece, that's the biggest piece of reparations, that kind of work, I think, because it's addressing the trauma.
Right.
Giving money or giving land or giving some physical thing to try to level the playing field, I think there's some importance to that, but that becomes secondary for me from the actual work of acknowledgement, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I mean, of course, we can argue either way. There'll be people who will be like, no, definitely on the economic side, the reparations are a way of filling that gap, because the economic opportunities that were afforded to white people over that period of time on the backs of the black people, that's one way to make them up. But
it can't be only that. See, if it's only that, that's not reparations, because the energy and the ideology hasn't shifted.
Yes.
So
Yes,
it's
I
not
agree.
either or. There's a both and that needs to happen.
Exactly, and that's why I agree with you, and that's why I said, it's a dual, actually not even a dual. It's probably like multiple strategy thing, but I definitely agree with your philosophy because that's, I think, for me, what hurt the most when with the outgoing administration's position on equity training in the government, right? Equity training in the country, understanding this whole conversation about understanding how people have been marginalized over centuries, right? And
Right.
educating a next generation, because it's kind of, I always come back to Comega, it's kind of like spending your time educating men how to love, right?
Hmm.
You have to educate the next generation about where they came from. And it's not saying you're not great. The argument is not that America is not great because it has this history of slavery. Somehow America became great because of its history of slavery, right? And you have to accept the fact that slavery is as an integral part of America's success, right? As anything. You can't whitewash it. You can't turn around and say, hey, this thing didn't exist. You can't
Right.
blackwash it, whitewash it, brownwash it. You have to
Right.
accept it. You have to
Right.
teach kids that we're not proud of this, right? But this
Right.
is how we created our industries. This is how, the cotton industry, which fueled the agriculture industry. And then we went from this agrarian,
Right.
industry to start to, these manufacturing things. This was our labor. These were our labor forces. We didn't pay them what they needed to be paid. And we were able to maximize our profits because we had this, this labor market, blah, blah, blah. And so what happens is we grow a generation of people who kind of knows that, hey, you know what, this is our history. We never want to repeat that, right? And we never want to treat it. But when that is treated as if, hey, that's a part, let's not bring that up. Let's not bring that up. Let's not look at it. What have you done for me lately? And I think that's been one of the biggest problems. And from what you're saying, I love it, because what you're saying is, if you don't change the systems, you don't change the way that you operate these systems, then you will give people money, but they'll be interacting with the same systems, right? In the same way, only, with a little bit more money in their pocket. And the systems have not been created to change the way those systems and those institutions actually interact with those people. I'll still be a
Hmm.
guy who, not for me, because I don't necessarily, as you know, my background, I don't necessarily fit into that group. But let's say I got reparations and I got $500,000. I'd still end up putting
Uh-huh.
that in the bank. I'd go and deposit my $500,000 in the bank. But guess what? When I walk into the bank in the hood, and you and I walk into the bank, even with $500,000 in the bank or $1 million in the bank, I will still get treated the same way.
Right. And actually, yeah, and even if you aren't treated the same way, see, I think there's the internalized damage that happens from the centuries of abuse. Well, I mean, I believe you will be treated the same way, but even if you weren't, there's still the issue that you're going to have dealing with the internalized stuff that you have.
Yeah.
Giving you $500,000 won't fix it. And I think that's part of our cultural issue. When we start thinking about the fix with capital, like just give someone money or give them land, it's not a fix.
Right.
I mean, there are times where like money is a fix. Like, if you need money to pay for the dentures or need money to pay for the braces or whatever, you need the money, you need the money. It's not the fix. It's a piece of it. I think the most important piece is the shift in consciousness that needs to happen for us. And with shift of consciousness, we'll start putting things in place that are much more fair rather than things, again, like the 13th Amendment, which isn't fair. And it's not just the 13th Amendment in itself. I mean, because basically it says if you're a convicted felon, blah, blah, blah. What came of that was laws were parsed out unevenly. So if you get caught for cocaine, you got a lighter sentence than if you were caught for crack cocaine. Crack cocaine, much cheaper to get. So people that are poor, mostly in urban areas, so we're talking about people that are of color and low income people, are going to get crack cocaine because it's cheaper. So when you go spend 15 years in prison for having crack, whereas in the more expensive white suburbs, you're getting slapped on the wrist for having powdered cocaine.
Right.
The laws are parsed out unevenly. So it's
Right.
not just the amendment, but it's the way that laws get
Generated from it.
generated and the way people get treated. And that's coming from core belief systems that need to shift. So
So we've been
yeah,
at this. I told you, I said, when you and I get started, time flies. So
yep, been over an
uh,
hour. Yeah.
give us a
What
thing.
what hasn't been said? What do you want to know from me that I haven't shared yet?
Guess what? We're going to have another episode. But for now, as we end this first one with Michael Chell, give us some hope, Michael. What's talk
Well,
hope.
well, so so one piece of hope that I can offer you. When I witness a 22-year-old young African American woman reading her poetry at the inauguration and
Mm,
basically saying, someday, I might be where you are, I might be president. And the fact that she could hope that, she could dream that, let alone that she's a brilliant poet at 22. There's hope that I have for our future with our youth and with people that are being more woke up and younger people being excited about being more woke up and doing the work. The fact that so many people came out and voted, regardless of who they voted for,
mm.
versus being totally apathetic. So I have hope there. I have hope every time I witness something like what I shared in the example in the race dialogue, where a white guy is saying to a black guy, well, just go to a different restaurant, just go somewhere else, and then gets it and has a shift. Anytime I see those kind of things happening, I feel hope. Um, just having this conversation with you is hopeful. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation 10 years ago. It just wouldn't be
Right.
happening.
Right.
And so the fact that this conversation is happening and that these kind of conversations are so much more common, in my experience, is hopeful for me. And yeah, so there's hope there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You know what? I want to thank you for being a pioneer. You've always, people for the listeners, you need to go and look up Comega, Comega. It's a Connecticut men's gathering that Michael and a few other brothers kind of put together many years ago. And I got connected with, I think in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, 2013, and has been like a lifeline, life changing for me. There are many of these things around the country. I'm glad I got into Comega. There are many of
Mhm.
them, but there is a conscious movement for men. There's a conscious movement of men, men of all colors, all sizes, shapes, heights, hearts, who are looking for, as Michael says, to move from up here down here
Right.
and to
Right.
live their lives, with their hearts as well, using their brains as their hearts, but also connecting with men, because I think we are like a solitary species by nature.
Hmm.
And once you're out in the savannah trying to hunt, it makes much more sense when you're trying to hunt in a pack.
Right.
And
Right.
the Comega pack has taught me that you can hunt with love,
Hmm.
and you can hunt with some reasoning, and you can always have people who will hold you accountable to live from heart and not just from mind. So my brother, you are always welcome. Like, I've been chasing you, and I'm so glad I finally caught you.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
but you always have wisdom. Every time that I've spoken with you, it doesn't matter whether we're fighting, we're laughing, we're thing. There's always something that I learn, and you have taught
Mm.
me a whole bunch of stuff. You've taught me about how to hold my own, you know,
Ah.
but how to
Ah.
defend myself even if I thought I was wrong, how to
Hmm.
speak up, because I used to go from zero to fight. I never
Ah.
had an in between,
Hmm.
and I think that what I learned, Comega taught me the in between.
Ah. Well,
that
thank
you
you.
can sit. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can sit in your discomfort and then find words on how to express your discomfort, and
Mhm.
it will be met with safety.
Mm.
And that's been life changing for me. So, this is Michael Chell, and Michael, I hope I truly hope you will take up our next invitation. I'm going to call this part 1.
Okay.
Right. And then we'll probably do a part 2 where we'll go in depth about some other things. But
Okay.
any last words you have for any invitations?
I would invite your listeners and viewers to check our website out at www.comega.org for the Connecticut Men's Gathering. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we're not meeting this spring in person. We're going to be doing a virtual Comega gathering rather than an actual physical gathering. I'm looking forward to September when we can get back to doing, hopefully by then, a physical
Yes.
gathering. So,
Yes.
yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I even get a COVID shot. I'm like, you know what? I gotta get out there. You know what I'm saying? So even it's like, oh, if you come, you can only come if you have a COVID. I'm getting a shot. Trust me. I mean, I had to get out there by
Yeah.
that lake, man. I tell you, man, I love you.
Okay.
I love you, and I thank you for this time. I thank you for coming on the Wholehearted Men Show, and look forward to speaking
Yeah,
with
look
you.
forward to seeing you again. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So just hang tight. Don't go anywhere. All right.
Okay. Yeah.